Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ashley and I like to talk about crime, creepy, and unbelievable stories. Now, if you guys are new here, don't forget to check out my TikTok. I do post a lot more content on there, about 1 to 3 times a day. More short stories, stuff that I can't necessarily always put on YouTube in long story format. So if that's your preference, or if you guys just want more content, go over there and check it out. I will link it in the description box for you guys. I also just want to send everyone a huge thank you for subscribing onto my YouTube channel. It has been growing in the past few weeks. I am extremely thankful and excited to see where this goes. If you guys wouldn't mind, I would please ask that you guys hit the like button, share this video, or even just get your friends to subscribe. It would really help me grow here and take this channel even further. And also, if you guys have any other case suggestions you want me to talk about, whether it's crime, creepy, or unbelievable stuff, put it in the comments down below. I always read my comments, I respond to them. So if you guys have anything in mind, don't be shy, just leave a comment below. All right, so enough rambling. Let's get into today's story. Now, today we're going to take our attention towards more of a supernatural story, and we're going to talk about UFOs. And specifically, we're going to talk about the Buff Ledge encounter. Now, I haven't seen too many people talk about this story, so it did take a lot of digging for me to do, but it is a very convincing story. So if you have heard about this, let me know. So this story actually takes us to Colchester, Vermont on August 7th, 1968. And it actually involves 2 teenagers that were at a camp called Buff Ledge. The camp was actually an all-girls camp, but once all of the girls that were attending that particular week had gone home, the camp was empty except all of the staff was still there. So this gave the staff a chance to kind of regroup, reset the camp for the next batch of students or Girl Scouts that were going to come and spend their summer there for a week. During this particular break, they had approximately 2 days, and that's when the entire encounter occurred. So the staff members in question are Michael Lapp, who was 16 years old, and one of his friends, Janet Cornell, who was also a staff member there. She was 19, and she was a water skiing instructor. So on the night in question, it was totally normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary going on. And the 2 teenagers were actually hanging out on the dock by the lake around 8 p.m. They were said to have just been relaxing, enjoying the evening, looking out at the sunset, but that's when they noticed something very strange in the sky. Initially, they saw a bright light up in the sky, and at first they thought it must have been a very big star, and then they changed their minds and said that it probably was the planet Venus. And so they were just staring at it, admiring it, but then it did something very odd and something that they were not expecting. The very bright light ended up moving in the sky. So immediately they knew that they were not looking at a planet or a star. Then things got very weird. So the star started moving towards them, started moving closer down to Earth, and then it changed shape. It turned into like a large cigar shape. And before they could really make out what it was they were looking at, from underneath this unidentified object, 3 additional smaller objects exited. Those 3 smaller objects then started going towards the 2 teenagers, while the larger object ended up doing some weird acrobatic movements in the sky before it finally sped off back into space. As one of the 3 smaller objects approached both Michael and Janet, they could see 2 small-like figures in the windows on top of the craft. And when they took a second to look at what they were observing, they said that the craft had somewhat of a disc shape with a dome on top, and it also had perimeter lights of white or amber color. So initially, from what they're describing, it sounds like the generic stereotypical UFO flying saucer that we've all come to know. So as the UFO is kind of hovering over their heads, it's basically within touching distance of the 2 teenagers at this point, Michael had the sudden urge to reach out and touch it. He recalled that he did not feel any sort of fear at this point. It was more of a curiosity. And so as he's extending his arm to touch this UFO, it started getting closer and closer to him, almost as if it were accepting the invite. However, before he could actually physically touch this UFO, a very bright beam of light engulfed both Michael and Janet, causing them to both lose consciousness And right before this actually happened, Michael was able to take a second to look at the light, and he was able to kind of put his hand in front of him and observe what was happening. And that's when he said that the light, there was something odd about it. It was either very strong or something that humans have never seen before. But when he looked at his hand, he was able to see the bones. He was able to see through his skin and observe his skeleton. Then it went completely blank for both the teenagers, and when they came to, they were both lying on the dock, feeling extremely dizzy and disoriented. As they were trying to regroup themselves and kind of figure out what just happened to them, they could hear in the background the noises of cars coming in. So they assumed it must have been the rest of the camp stuff coming over to kind of hang out with them. Right before the rest of the staff members approached the area where they were at, Michael remembered waking up enough to see the UFO hovering and then speeding off into the darkness. However, no one else seemed to notice anything odd in the sky, and weirdly enough, Michael and Janet didn't really discuss what had just happened to them with anyone else, or even with themselves for that fact, which I found to be extremely odd. All they did apparently was go back to their cabins and went to bed and basically pretended like nothing had ever happened. This reaction, like I said, was extremely troubling, and it would be very odd to anyone looking in on this case and doing any sort of research. Why would they not discuss this with at least themselves? I fully understand not discussing this with other people that were not there to experience what you did, just out of fear, out of being stigmatized, or having someone not believe you. But I would definitely take this opportunity to discuss it with the person that I had just gone through all of this with. It kind of reminds me of the movies Men in Black. If you guys haven't seen them, with Will Smith from back in the 90s and the early 2000s, whenever someone would encounter a UFO, they would then flash them with this bright light, which would basically make them forget the entire encounter and whatever they had seen. So it makes me wonder if these two kids had something similar happen to them, where it kind of just made them completely forget, or at least be confused about what had just happened, to the point where they couldn't even bring themselves to talk about it with each other. So we would later find out that there were two other staff members who actually did recall seeing some sort of bright, strange light in the sky take off right next to where Michael and Janet were found. And those two people were Susan Middleton and Barbara Bryant. All they really remembered, though, was seeing a strange light kind of float around and then fly off and disappear. So over the next few days, Michael said he had some strange dreams and felt just uncomfortable being in the dark, especially inside of this dream. He said that he felt very uncomfortable and didn't really know what was going on. All he could really know or feel subconsciously is that he had just experienced something astonishing. However, he just couldn't find the words to put them in. Eventually, the summer camp season came to an end, and both Michael and Janet, although they were friends, they both had to go home, and they went their separate ways and didn't talk for a very long time. You would think that that would be the end of their encounter, but it was basically the beginning of this very strange story. Over the next 10 years, Michael would continue to have these very vague memories, strange dreams, that he was meeting very unusual people in a strange place that he couldn't recognize. And he also noted that it was quite dark. No matter how hard he really tried to shake off this feeling, there was like this memory in the back of his head that was really fighting to come out, really pushing him to remember, but he just couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried. These feelings and flashes of memories eventually turned into nightmares, where he would basically wake up in the middle of the night sweating, his heart was pounding, he just had fear running through his veins. And when it got to this point, it was disrupting his sleep so much that it started to affect his daily life. That's when he knew he needed to get help, or at least do some research and try to figure out what was going on. So he starts doing some digging and starts doing research on UFO sightings, and that's when he eventually contacted a UFO investigator named Walter Webb that worked at the Center for UFO Studies. And Walter took such a big interest in this story that he decided to initiate a 5-year investigation into Michael's story. Now, this case was said to have absolutely fascinated Walter, and we'll get into that a bit later on in the video, but he went on to actually write a book about the entire story, and I've seen it available on Amazon if you guys are interested in it, but it's called Encounter at Buff Ledge. And during this investigation, not only did he interview Michael, but he was also able to get in touch with Janet. And during the 5-year investigation interviews, he did interview both of them, but he also made sure to interview them separately. The goal of doing these interviews separately was to make sure that the information didn't get contaminated with each other's story. He also wanted to make sure or to see how credible both of these witnesses were. He didn't want them feeding each other stories or coming up with a similar story to tell him. He really wanted to see if they were both telling the truth based on the recollection of the entire experience and how much detail each of them could provide. So one of the more thought-provoking methods that Walter used to interview both Michael and Janet was through hypnosis. Today, it's a very popular tool used to recover repressed memories from trauma survivors, but it's also believed to be very effective enough for people to recall past lives, especially if you believe in that sort of thing. Past life regression is a very interesting topic that could probably deserve its own video. But the point of this is that hypnosis has been proven to be a quite effective tool to bring forward memories that have either been blocked out or forgotten. So with that, both Michael and Janet underwent multiple hypnotic sessions with Walter. So of course, throughout the hypnosis, both Michael and Janet were able to recall a lot more detail from these memories that they couldn't quite figure out. The first thing that they recalled is that they both had many hours of unaccounted time and they couldn't figure out what had happened. But then things started to intensify quite a bit, and they hadn't just seen this UFO from a distance, regardless of how close it actually got to Michael when he was reaching out to touch it. They had actually been abducted and came into close contact with these alien beings. So when that bright light came down and was shining on both of them, that's when they both had actually been taken aboard the UFO spacecraft. And once they were inside, they noticed that it had a very similar setup to what we know as hospitals. There was a bed present, there were lights, tools, computers. There was also a bunch of monitors and a bunch of people or beings that appeared to be medical examiners. Horrifyingly enough, though, they were both subjected to various medical procedures, including having a bunch of small tools inserted into their bodies. They also remember, though, being able to communicate with these beings through telepathy. One of the things that they remember being communicated to was that they were there to share knowledge with them about the nature of the universe and the purpose of their entire abduction. So of course you're all wondering what these beings looked like. Well, according to Michael, he said that they were much more on the smaller side, approximately 5 feet tall, with a grayish skin tone and a green bodysuit. They also had a very large black almond eye shape with abnormally large heads, 2 small holes for a nose, no visible mouth, and they only had 3 long fingers on each hand. And if you guys know anything about UFOs, or if you're into that sort of subject area, then you know that this description fits the typical description of the gray alien. When it came to Janet's turn, she would go on to say that the UFOs told her to close her eyes during the entire procedure, and she had this deep sense and knowing that they were telling her to do this for her own good. However, during the procedure, she ended up going against this feeling and she ended up opening her eyes, but remembers immediately regretting this because she was absolutely horrified about what she was seeing, about what these things were doing to her. Now, apparently, during the time where Janet was being examined, Michael was also wide awake and he was able to see Janet and he was able to see what they were doing to her. He said that she was strapped down to a bed and they were shining a light into her eye, examining both of them. And then they started scraping her arm with some sort of blunt object, almost as if they were kind of doing a general health check or a routine health check that we would normally do at our family doctors. He also witnessed them take a blood sample from Janet. And then he said that there was this large triangle-shaped piece of equipment that was then lowered up from the roof or the ceiling down close to Janet's body. He didn't fully understand what was happening until he noticed that this big machine started inserting smaller parts into Janet's orifices, sucking out small amounts of bodily fluid. So horrified, he had no idea what was going on, but he did manage to ask these beings what they were doing to Janet. And surprisingly, they responded to him. They told him that they were, quote unquote, spawning consciousness. And to this day, Michael and Janet have absolutely no idea what that means, but there have been multiple interpretations of what it could potentially mean. So after that, Michael and Janet both looked around the room and they recalled that there were a bunch of panels of screens kind of surrounding them. And as the beings were examining Janet, they were also looking at the screen, almost as if they were reading some sort of result or looking through data. But whatever it is that they were doing, they were kind of just nodding in a positive notion. At one point, Michael became distracted and he ended up looking out one of the windows of the spacecraft. And that's when he noticed that they weren't on Earth anymore, that they had actually been flying and they were now approaching the original long cigar-shaped object that he had seen at the very beginning of the encounter. He remembered that it was glowing very, very brightly, and he just had this inner feeling that this was, quote unquote, the mothership, and that they were now about to enter it from underneath. So they go inside the mothership, and that's when they were taken to another examination room with even more of these gray beings. He recalled that there was approximately a few dozen of them, all of which had this very creepy, eerie look when they were staring at them. They then turned their attention to Michael, and they actually ended up taking him to another room, placed him on a bed, and they put this helmet on him. However, there were these wires sticking out of him connecting to some sort of computer. The only thing that I could recall or probably compare this to would be if you've seen The Matrix, when they have those things placed on them through the back of their neck where it connects to, I guess, a motherboard. I'll put a picture here for you guys so you understand what I'm talking about. But Michael had no idea what was happening at this point. All he could understand is that the alien beings were looking at a bunch of these screens, and they were also nodding their heads again. They were like nodding in approval, like, yes, this is a good thing, almost as if they were approving or in agreement with whatever text was being shown on the screen. But Michael has absolutely no idea what they were reading or even looking at. Then the entire situation changed. One of the beings approached Michael and ended up slightly touching him on the arm, and that's when he suddenly slipped away into what he calls another dimension. He said that he saw a bunch of colors that he had never seen before. Things were moving in odd ways. There were a bunch of actual human people there as well. And the closest thing he could compare it to would be a psychedelic trip. The scene then ended up changing to a dome-like room with even more dozens of TV monitors surrounding him. And this time his attention ended up shifting to one particular TV screen. And that screen showed him from an outsider perspective, him and Janet both lying at the dock right before this entire thing happened. And then suddenly he felt like his entire body or even his soul was being vacuumed and then rushed back into his physical body. And at that point, that was when both him and Janet ended up waking up on the dock, just as he had seen on the TV screen. So the question remains, was this real or was it not? Now, according to Walter, this entire encounter was quite significant to him based on the amount of detail that both Michael and Janet were able to provide and recall during these hypnosis sessions. But like I said earlier, he made sure to put them both separately, interview them separately, do these hypnotic sessions separately. And to him, he said that it was astonishing that they were both able to deliver stories that matched each other with significant detail. So to him, there's basically very little chance that both of these people were lying. In addition to the 5-year investigation, Walter also had both Michael and Janet undergo psychological tests because he wanted to determine their character. And it was discovered that both of them appeared to be honest, reliable, and credible witnesses, which makes their entire story even more compelling. Now, as for what spawning consciousness could mean, this has been interpreted to mean a few things. And one of the things I think about the most when I hear this phrase is some sort of implantation or trying to mix humans with alien race. Were they potentially trying to impregnate Janet or take her DNA so they could do these sort of infertility tests back on the ship? Others believe that they could have potentially just been doing something to her subconscious and giving her information that then she would just have this knowing of and potentially share with the rest of humanity. From most of the alien encounters stories that I have come across, it usually ends up being one of these two things, like the encounter in Zimbabwe with all of the school children. They were given a message to pass on to humanity for a greater cause, versus other alien encounters where aliens basically just do all of these testing on humans because they want to either improve their own information about humans or, maybe it could be something much more nefarious. But that is the story of the Buff Ledge encounter. Let me know if you guys have heard of this story or whether or not you guys think Michael and Janet were telling the truth or if you think they were lying. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video.